milling about. My name is Sean Flaherty. I'm from the Department of Economics here at F&M, and my only task is to welcome you to the campus if you're not one of us, and to introduce the Master of Ceremony for the forum tonight. His name is Frank Nestle, and he is the Research Director for the Public Banking Institute. He's also an adjunct professor at UPenn's graduate program in organizational dynamics, where he teaches courses on sustainability. So without further ado, I will pass the program over to Frank. Thank you all.
And Sean, thank you so much for being our host. We're very grateful to the Department of Economics here at Franklin and Marshall for hosting us for this important forum, Building the New Economy. Thank you all for joining us. As Sean mentioned, I'm a volunteer for the Public Banking Institute. We also have Mike Crisp, who will be speaking later, and I also want to introduce Walt McCree, another member of our team. Walt? Where are you? Yeah, here's Walt in the back. And I would also like to thank Tony Seligson, who is in the back over here, and who's on the video and has volunteered to help us with it. After studying and teaching sustainability graduate courses for the last 5 years at the University of Pennsylvania, I've come to believe strongly that the key to sustainability for local cities, counties, and states is to take charge of their financial assets and leverage those assets to stimulate the local economies. For them, to do so would truly be an economic revolution here in the United States. The best way to execute on that revolution is for local economies to divest their financial resources from the speculative Wall Street banks and to leverage those funds for the betterment of their own communities. We had some slides earlier. I don't think many of you really had a chance to take a look at them, but it really laid out why local municipalities need to energize and support their own free enterprise economies. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge a colleague of mine, Sally Warner, who's also here from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Where is Sally? And you know, Sally has done yeoman work in determining scientifically why we need to energize our local free enterprise networks. And you'll be hearing a lot more of that, I'm sure, as time goes on. So do we really need a free enterprise economy, or do we have one now? Or is our economy being run for the benefit of the uber rich? Now, just this week I received my copy of Forbes magazine. They call themselves the Capitalist Tool. This is the billionaire issue. And it says here, right on the front, it says, the names, the numbers, and the stories behind the 1,426 people who control the world. Now that sure sounds to me like an oligarchy and not democracy. And I, for one, don't want billionaires to control my world. America needs a revolution, and that is what this forum is all about. We have 3 speakers. Each will speak for approximately 15 or 20 minutes. And then we'll have a panel discussion so we can take your questions. It gives me great pleasure at this time to introduce our first speaker, Michael Schumann, who I first met in 2006 at an early Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. That's BALI, it's a national organization. And that meeting was up in Burlington, Vermont. The organization has grown by about 400% since then. Michael is the Pied Piper for local investing and for local control of local financial assets. He has just returned stateside yesterday after an extended trip to Australia, and we're very fortunate that he was able to join us today. I also want to just point out his latest book, Local Dollars, Local Cents. You see it up here on the screen. He's an accomplished author. He's also the Director of Research for Valley and a fellow at the Post-Carbon Institute. Michael lives in Washington, D.C., but in truth, he really lives out of a suitcase because he's always on the road. So, Michael, thank you for being with us.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you this evening. You know, one of the heartening things about doing this work is how times change. When I've done 3 books on local economies, and when the first was published, I came to the University of Kentucky and 2 people showed up. 1 left earlier. So I feel like things have come quite a distance over 15 years. So what I would like to do, and I may go more like 22, 23 minutes, if the moderator will allow this. What I would like to do is to consolidate what I often do in 8 hours of a workshop in 22 minutes of time to give you a sense of what the local investment revolution that is occurring right now looks like, and give you some sense of how you can tap into it. In my last book, The Small Mart Revolution, I created a simple 6P formula, because people remember things by simple formulas, for local economic development. And so if I were an economic developer, I would be looking to support locally owned businesses, maximizing local self-reliance, and I would be trying to be mindful of planning, people, partners, purchasing, and policy making. So what I mean by these things, leaks. Where are all of the places where your community is unnecessarily buying outside goods and services? Because that's the market that you could have for new or expanded local businesses, and that means more jobs and economic multiplier impacts. People, how do we get new entrepreneurs to lead these leaf-blowing businesses? Partners, how do we get local businesses to work together and become more competitive as a team than they would be working apart? Purse, how do we get savings from our banks or our pension funds into those businesses? Purchasing, how do we spearhead buy local or think local first campaigns? And policy, how do we remove all of the biases in law that exist right now against local small business? Now, in the work that I do, and whether it is in the United States, Australia, I've done some work in Brazil and in Europe, the message that comes back from the local business community is pretty much the same. The single biggest obstacle that they face is purse. It is getting capital. And the reason is, sadly, you. And I want to explain why. By show of hands here, how many people have mindfully bought something locally over the last week? Okay, so most of the hands are up. By show of hands, how many people do their banking at a local bank or credit union? So about half the hands. Okay, those of you with pension funds, I know some of you are students without pension funds, so you can skip this question. Those of you with pension funds, how many of you put them primarily in local small business? Okay, this is outrageous. You've come to a forum to support your community and local small business, and yet all of you sitting here are systematically over-investing in the Fortune 500 companies that are least connected with the well-being of this area, and under-investing, that is not investing in all, in the local businesses we know are the most important source of prosperity and wealth. No wonder why you are in so much trouble. The reason why this has happened is that we have securities laws that we created in the early Jurassic period. And these securities laws created a system of what we might call investment apartheid. If you are this guy, the accredited investor, the top 1% of wealth or income, you can put your money in anything, anytime, no questions asked. If you're in the other 99%, you can only do so if a business spends $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 on a disclosure statement prepared by a lawyer. And a disclosure statement is a thick document, often written in 8-point font, all caps. No human being has ever been observed to read it. And as you go through, every single page says one variation or another of, you will lose everything. You will lose everything. Hey, you will lose everything. So disclosure has become an empty ritual, which is really a welfare program for securities lawyers. We have to change this system. And if we change it, if we change this system, there could be a capital transfer of $15 trillion to local small businesses across America. Why? Our long-term savings in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, pension funds, and insurance funds is roughly $30 trillion. Half of our economy in jobs and output is in small and medium-scale local business. So, if the market were operating efficiently, half of that capital should be going to the half of the economy that is local small business. Now, $15 trillion turns out to be about $50,000 per capita. So take the size of your community and then multiply by $50,000. This is real money that could make a real difference in building economies. So I want to quickly run through with you 10 tools that are being used right now for the 99% of us who are unaccredited to start putting our money into local small businesses. Number one, specialty certificates of deposit. Some people are now approaching their local bank and saying, look, we understand why you're a little reluctant to give money or lend money to local small businesses, but we'll tell you what, can we give you money in a special account and charge you with lending that back to local businesses that we think are priorities? And some banks have said yes. So, for example, Equal Exchange, a fair trade company based in Boston, convinced their local bank, Wainwright, recently renamed Eastern, to create a special fair trade certificate of deposit. You put money in and you get a little certificate, and at some point you can cash it out again. Unaccredited investors can participate. And this one little innovation has given Equal Exchange a $1 million line of credit. So why not approach local banks in this area and ask to create your own specialized CD to support local businesses? Number two, co-ops. Co-op memberships are not securities. But if a co-op seeks to take a loan from its members, that is a security. But we know how to do the filings on this relatively inexpensively. So this has been one of the most important forms of local investment. And if you go to where Sally lives in Carborough, North Carolina, you will find the Weaver Street Market, 13,000 member grocery co-op. When they wanted to build their third grocery store, they needed $1 million. They borrowed it from their members, paying them 5 to 8% interest on that. Number three, LION. LION stands for the Local Investment Opportunities Network of Port Townsend, Washington. The guy on the right over here, James Fraser, used to be a hedge fund manager in New York, felt guilty about it, came back to his hometown, and created a wonderful social invention. So there's another wrinkle in securities law I didn't tell you about, which is even after you've spent your $25,000, $50,000, or $100,000 to do your little disclosure statement, you still may only be able to approach friends and family, people you have a pre-existing relationship with. So what Fraser has done is he holds a party in Port Townsend once a month, bringing businesses and investors together, plying them with good food and alcohol, and at the end of the party he has a little sign-up list that indicates who you now have a pre-existing relationship with. And just this one little social innovation allows him to spread around business plans and has led to more than $1 million per year of new investment coming into local businesses. Again, in a 10,000 person town, if we go to Reading, you should be able to do $9 or $10 million of local investment per year, just with this one social innovation. Number 4, sponsorship sites like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. Sponsorship sites really just invite you to give money for a token, and the tokens are not regarded as securities, so this is a total dodge of securities law. This particular advertisement here on Kickstarter is for the Brickside Brewery, Copper Harbor, Michigan's first microbrewery. Give them $1, you get a thank you note. $25, a t-shirt. $1,000, maybe you get the beer named after you. All of these things, as I said, are not considered securities. This is a brilliant way of getting money into businesses without paying lawyers. Now, who in their right mind would give money for a t-shirt? And the answer is, last year on Kickstarter alone, $150 million worth of people. And they're ahead of that curve this year. Number 5, peer-to-peer lending. If you are Kiva, Kiva is like the Grameen Bank in internet form. They give peer loans to micro-entrepreneurs, primarily in the global south, and you only get your principal back. What that means then, since you're not getting interest in most US states, this is also not considered a security. So this is another dodge of securities law. Prosper and the Lending Club are, in fact, securities. They do pay interest, and they have done several $1 million worth of securities work in order to justify their existence. Now, my concern about all of these things is that every $100 you, say, loan to a micro-entrepreneur in Bolivia is $100 unavailable for an entrepreneur here in the Lancaster area. So what we're going to start seeing is a proliferation of sites, and I show you some of the names here, like the Money Crowd and Lucky Ant, which are bringing together local investors and local businesses so that the money really is staying in your community. Number 6, slow munis. There is a long and rich tradition of US cities issuing bonds, the income of which is tax exempt, but issuing bonds for really dumb economic development projects, like big corporate attractions or big industrial development parks. Rarely are these bonds used to support smart local economic development. I have the pictures up here of a bunch of Boulder food businesses, because last year I did a research project for the county of Boulder on local food, and the principal recommendation was that they issue food bonds. That is, that the county sell bonds, bring money into a pool, and use that pool to collateralize loans from local banks going to priority local food businesses. Number 7, pre-selling, another dodge of securities law. In most US states, when you pre-sell goods and services, this is not regarded as a security. So for example, Awaken Cafe in Oakland, California, they needed to move to a new site. They needed $100,000. They didn't want to waste all that money on attorneys. So they decided to pre-sell coffee. Here was the deal. Buy $1,000 of coffee today, you get $1,200 worth tomorrow when the new store opens up. So a 20% rate of return. This is largely how they finance their entire move without paying attorneys more than a nominal fee for advice. Number 8, local stock. Now we get into interesting stuff. This picture here comes from beautiful downtown Mount Ayr, Iowa, a town of 1,500 people. 15 years ago, they created a store called Community Grocers. And they did a small stock issue. You had to be a resident of Iowa in order to purchase this stock. 350 people stepped forward, bought the stock, and this grocery store has tripled in size and now pays an annual dividend of about 5% per year. Now, what bothers me a little bit about this success story is, again, the lawyer issue, right? Because they either had to pay a lawyer a lot of money to do the local stock, or they had to get something that's very rare, pro bono lawyer time. So I started to puzzle over how can we really fix the securities law system. And one of the things that really bothered me was that the whole purpose of doing securities laws was to protect grandma from buying swampland in Florida. You don't want anyone to get defrauded. You know, these are all very reasonable concerns. But what bothered me is that grandma can go into any one of 1,000 casinos in the United States. And when grandma walks through the casino door, do we say, "Excuse me, grandma, but can you prove that you are an accredited gambler?" Or do we say, "Before you sit down and play blackjack, please read this disclosure statement on the risks of playing blackjack and sign"? So we have two systems of risk management in this country. One system called gambling, where you can lose everything for nothing and probably will, independent of your income. And another system called saving your community by investing in local small business, and unless you pay off lawyers $100,000 for a useless disclosure statement, you can't play. That bothered me. So I wrote an article for the Federal Reserve recommending, mischievously, that we have a $100 exemption. $100, no questions asked, you can put that money in any business anytime, even if you're an unaccredited investor. Friends of mine filed a rulemaking petition with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Hundreds of letters poured into the SEC. What did the SEC do with this? Nothing. 18 months ago, the head of the SEC, Mary Shapiro, was sitting before the Government Operations Committee, where she was asked a series of hostile questions, including, whatever became of the $100 exemption proposal? And she twisted in her seat sort of uncomfortably and said, "Well, we get these ridiculous proposals for reform all the time, and, you know, maybe we'll put together a committee in a few months to look at them." The committee went ballistic. Unemployment at that point was 9% in the country. And she was effectively saying, proposals, no-brainer proposals to get more money into the only kinds of businesses we know produce jobs, it's not that important. Well, the committee then voted unanimously, Occupy Democrats, Tea Party Republicans, unanimously, not for a $100 exemption, but for a $10,000 exemption. This then moved to the Senate, where this guy said, "Get it done." And the result is now there is a $2,000 exemption. And every American will soon, as soon as the SEC does its homework, be able to put $2,000 per company per year to support local businesses with very little legal paperwork. In other words, we legalized local investment. And the revolution's happened. Now, it's not enough, of course, to just create lots of local stock issues. People are going to want a place where they can resell the stock. Your buddy here, Trexler Profit, was one person who's been working on this issue of creating a local stock market with the LANEX. The guy on the left, Michael Van Patten of Mission Markets, has a whole set of products that he calls community portals that are enabling communities to do basically turnkey operations to start up local stock markets. Now, no one should take what I say as meaning that you should pull all of your savings out of the bank and put it into your one favorite local business, because at the end of the day, we have to invest locally in a smart way. And that means creating a pool of money, diversified in a lot of local businesses. The problem is that the law around investment companies is even more obnoxious than the law around the issuance of stock. So, for example, we have 7,500 mutual funds in the United States. We all, as unaccredited investors, can put money in mutual funds, but not a single one puts even a penny in a local small business. Not because it's prohibited by law, but because we're not that interested in it. So we have a lot of work in creating investment companies oriented toward local business. There's a few oddball exceptions to the Investment Company Act. This guy, Steve Fireman in Columbus, Ohio, runs a nonprofit called the Economic and Community Development Institute. He has 14 revolving loan funds supporting local small business. He is the banker of First Choice in Columbus. And the 14th fund is now open for investment by unaccredited investors. In the meantime, people are doing other creative things to pool their money. Small groups of people are creating investment clubs, and as long as you make all of your decisions together as a club, this is perfectly legal. No Small Potatoes is a group of investors, including unaccredited investors in Maine, who've each tossed $5,000 to $10,000 into a pot and then do small loans to farmers and local food businesses. But the secret weapon of local investment is so secret that a dummies book has been written about it. The self-directed IRA. Because with your existing IRA or 401k or other retirement account, you can only put your money in those 7,500 mutual funds that are 100% non-local. With a self-directed IRA, you can put your money into everything we just talked about. You could put it in targeted CDs at your local bank. You could lend it to your co-op. You could put it in a Kiva or a Prosper loan. You could put it in local stock. You could put it in Steve Fireman's fund. You could even use it for your local investment club. The only thing you cannot do with a self-directed IRA is invest in your own business or your own house, or your kid's house or business. But interestingly, you can invest in your neighbor's house. And your neighbor can take his self-directed IRA and put it in your house. And therein lies my talk for next year. Can local investment beat Wall Street? If you have a loser social life like I do, and you just come back from Australia, and you spend a day on Saturday doing your laundry, and listening to bad AM radio, you will hear the likes of Rick Edelman telling you, just leave your money in Wall Street 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you will get 8%, 12%, 20%. All of these numbers are made up. They are pure fraud. I begin Local Dollars, Local Cents by taking data from Robert Shiller, who wrote a wonderful book, Irrational Exuberance, and he's the founder of the Case-Shiller Index. He's a Yale economist. And if you look at the history of the returns of the S&P, Standard & Poor's, what you find is that in any 12-month period, if you add dividends, as you should, and take out inflation, as you should, the typical rate of return is 2.6%. And at 2.6% per year, there are a lot of local investments that do better. We talked about 3 of them here. Equal Exchange, Community Grocers, Weaver Street Market are all doing over 5% right now. Now, I'm not arguing that every local investment is going to beat every non-local investment. That would be a ludicrous claim. But as Kenneth Boulding, my favorite late economist, says, anything that exists is possible. And if we can see local investments that are beating global investments, we can begin to build a system around it. And what happens when the first $1 trillion moves from Wall Street to Main Street? I think investment advisors start to scratch their head and say, the smart money seems to be moving locally. They also notice that as $1 trillion moves out of Wall Street, there's less demand for those securities, and Wall Street prices are dropping. So this $1 trillion could be the beginning of the next trillion, and another, and another. This could move very quickly. Where I want to leave you, and where I end my book, is with a children's book called A Blue So Blue by Jean-Francois Dumont. And it's a story of a boy who's obsessed with the color blue. And everywhere he goes, he paints the color blue. But there's one shade of blue that mesmerizes him, comes to him in his dreams, and he can't figure out where this shade of blue comes from. So he sets out on an international journey to find the blue. He goes to the Louvre to look at the masters, can't find the blue there. He goes on an ocean journey, looking for patches of blue in the water, can't find it there. Goes to a blues bar in New Orleans, nope, not there. Then he goes to a desert, and there's a blue-hooded stranger who says, what you've been looking for may never have been very far away. And suddenly it dawns on the boy. The blue he was looking for, the blue that mesmerized him, the blue that he set out on this international journey on, was actually the blue in his mother's eyes. And it's a reminder that we travel thousands, tens of thousands of miles to look for things that are right in our backyard. And that, my friends, is the story of local investment. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And now, we are honored to have the Honorable Vaughn Spencer, the Mayor of Reading, Pennsylvania. Mayor Spencer was elected in 2011 and quickly concluded that his city needs to do something different. Reading is Pennsylvania's sixth largest city and faces many of the challenges cities all around the United States are facing, namely lost jobs, declining tax revenues, cutbacks in state and federal spending, and increasing levels of urban poverty. Mayor Spencer holds a degree from Cheyney College, is a Reading native and a longtime resident. And I'll let the mayor tell you more about what he's been doing. Mayor, thank you for joining us.
I don't know if I was supposed to stand up or not, but being a former educator and teacher, I'm better on my feet than I am sitting. But you know, the interesting thing when I was looking at Michael's presentation about the boy looking for blue, as the mayor of the city of Reading, I find myself looking at red all the time. And it's kind of an irony because, just to give you a little bit of a background, since we are not too far from Franklin and Marshall University. When I first got involved in city government, I was still teaching school. The form of government in Reading is a strong mayor form of government, but council members are part-time. And I remember, you know, getting involved in many of the discussions around in our city about the direction our city was going. And I kept thinking, you know, those guys are, you know, the mayor and some of the department directors, these folks are just making bad decisions. It's about their political decisions. Because, hey, look, I remember Reading had all these businesses, whether it was General Battery, Berkshire, Nidcar, Tech, Glidden Paint, Lewd. I mean, we had businesses in our community. And we were doing well. And then we started to experience with a lot of the other cities across Pennsylvania and around the nation, and that is that corporations aren't like the family businesses that started out in your community. There was a time where the family businesses thought about the community. They thought about the people who worked in their companies. They looked after the welfare of the workers who in turn worked hard for the company. And then you started seeing not local board members, but you started seeing these companies become more nationally diversified as far as the makeup of their boards. And pretty soon you went from family business concepts to the corporate stockholders need to make profits, need to make a lot of money. And in order to do that, they changed the directions as to their investments in the community. And little by little, those companies that I mentioned started to leave the city of Reading. In fact, out of a number of the companies I mentioned, whether it was General Battery, Berkshire Knitting, Glidden Paint, Luton's, Dana, Western Electric, the outlet industry, they're all gone. They don't exist anymore. But what does exist in my community is police protection, public safety protection, fire, public works, and the dilemma then becomes, how do you provide for these things with a shrinking tax base? And not only is it a shrinking tax base as far as being able to provide those public services that an elected official is responsible for, it also impacted on our school district. So just like all of the other third-class cities around the state, Harrisburg, Chester, York, out west, Aliquippa, Newcastle, all those other areas are all experiencing the same thing. And that was whether or not the major industry of that city left, creating a shrinking tax base, impacting on the educational programs of your city, and then you being stuck with figuring out just how you're going to move the city forward. Well, little by little, I moved from council member to council president of the city of Reading. Spent 10 years as council president of the city of Reading. And I thought to myself, I started seeing some of the things that were happening, but I wasn't in a position to really do anything because I was just one of 7 votes, and we all know what goes on in that political structure, is trying to get a consensus as to where do we go next. Well, I became mayor last year, and of course, a lot of people were saying, are you crazy? Why would you want to be mayor of the city of Reading with the direction everything was going? And I said, well, I want to become mayor because I really believe that we're looking in the wrong direction as far as what we need to do to turn our city around. I said that because, we fell under Act 47. Now, for some of you that aren't familiar with the Act 47 law in Pennsylvania, basically pre-bankruptcy. We developed a structural deficit that we were told in 2008, 2009, if we didn't do anything within the next 5 to 6 years, we could be looking at a $50 million deficit. And so we bought in on it. Okay, we're going to go Act 47. The state, the Department of Community and Economic Development told us all the advantages of going in Act 47. And, hey, you get in there and we're going to give you a plan, and we're going to help you turn your city around. Well, what happened was it wasn't much of a plan. They gave us a plan, but that was pretty much it. They said, well, we'll help you with a non-resident EIT. We'll help generate some additional revenues, to cover some of the shortfalls you'll have with taxes. And of course, the other thing that they told us was, hey, we're going to be there, we're going to give you these grants to help you, move the city forward. Well, little by little, you had governmental decisions taking place in Harrisburg, and to the point where, if you remember in some of the discussions centered around there, that the courts had ruled against the Act 47 plan being a part of contract negotiations, and so we were stuck at one point not even being able to see some of the benefits that we were supposed to get under Act 47. And then they told us, okay, you can have the non-residence tax 1 year. We didn't give it a full year. And so last year, when we saw that we were still going to be short in generating enough taxes to cover our just basic services, they still didn't want to help us out with that. What they started talking about was looking at our assets. Now, when we first went into this plan, the plan was, you know, no privatization, you don't want to sell any assets, you know, because you need the reoccurring revenue. But when they started backing off on some of the incentives that this program was supposed to provide for us, they started saying, basically, maybe you need to lease your parking, you know. Maybe you need to start looking at your water and some of the other ways in which we were able to generate revenue. It was becoming very frustrating, very frustrating. So we continue to still move on, but then as we were starting to work with relationships with our water authority, the state government passed Act 73. And basically what it said was that in the case of our water authority, which is a municipal authority, that we were not going to be able to use any of that money that was giving us close to $5 million, that now we were no longer going to be able to access those monies under Act 73. So in other words, we had a so-called way of coming up with a concept of generating monies to help the city, and it was yanked out from underneath us. So you get to the point where you begin to wonder, just, you know, where are you supposed to get the help? And of course, Harrisburg found that out. You don't challenge Act 47, because if you do, they're going to, they changed the law. They amended the law to be able to bring in a receiver who basically will come in and start making decisions for the city. So we were in Act 47, which was not really a good solution. We're into our second year. Actually, we're starting our third year. And the plan is supposed to be over in 2014. But on top of that, then we got the notoriety in 2011 of having the highest poverty rate in the country for a city with 65,000 people or higher. We managed to beat out Flint, Michigan, which at that time was the poster child for cities that needed help. Now, the positive, or I should say the good news this year, is we went from number 1 to number 6. You know, so if you want to consider that as being going, I guess we're going in the right direction, but it sure wasn't fast enough. I'm mentioning all these things because after a while, when I came in, and even before I became mayor, part of what I was looking at was getting the community together, accessing the think tanks in our city. We formed the Act 47 Community Grassroots Group, whereby we were we were the only city in Pennsylvania up to that point that actually got the community involved in helping to draft our plan. And what that did was it set out some of the things that we wanted to see to make sure that we held on to as many of our assets as possible, and at the same time, we're not falling into that privatization trap. No matter what public financial management was trying to tell us to do, we had a plan. The other thing that we created was we called it the Green Team at first, but it was actually a sustainability committee that we began to form. So we started to think out in front of this whole cycle in advance. When I became mayor, we started to implement those things. We started to make the changes that a city needs to make. The mayor of the city, the previous mayors of the city of Reading had an administrative assistant who basically was at the reception desk area, and he had a chief assistant. When I became mayor, I knew that I was going to have to get people around me that could do the things that needed to be done, and people who were thinking out of the box. And so I created an Office of Sustainability and Policy. I created an Office of Public Service. I also had a media person come on board because we had to begin to change the perception of the city of Reading that we found ourselves being cast under. With the help of these individuals, we started reaching out into the community. We expanded our sustainability group to the point where we have professors from our local colleges involved. We have a cross-section of our city, labor, business, people who are looking at the new technologies that are out there. Because we also realize that there is an economy that needs to be developed in the city of Reading. We can no longer sustain ourselves on the old economy concepts of having a big major business and then everybody gets a job in the business and the salaries come in and you have tax. That wasn't going to happen anymore. And so we had to look at how we could build an economy in the city of Reading. And we had to begin to look at our assets, which we had quite a few. We had to look at our waste to wealth incentives, recycling, how we're handling our trash, and build an economy from that. And looking at how other cities, what they were doing. I went to Edmonton, Canada, and we saw what Edmonton, Canada was doing related to that whole environmental issue and how they were using it to create jobs, and also jobs that we were going to put our local residents in. That was the other key. We needed to provide jobs for our residents, people who were living in the city. And of course, what enabled us to do that was we reached out to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, Neil Selman, who's in our audience here tonight, because we realized that we needed help and somebody to begin to connect us with the resources that are out there nationally. We had to begin to create a new economy in the city of Reading. From there, we started looking at another asset we have, which many cities have and aren't taking advantage of, and that is, we were dealing with a major bank that we were putting all our city monies into. But then the realization became, what are we getting from this? How are our financial assets benefiting our community? Some people would say, well, there's the Community Reinvestment Act. Well, we found out rather quickly that that's not a viable option. Perfect example. I was trying to get a meeting with with this major bank just to find out what they were doing, as far as reinvestment dollars in our community. And I got invited to a meeting. It was the bank, a nonprofit, and we were asked to be there, sit. In fact, it was in my office. And everyone started talking about this partnership. And finally I said, well, partnership for what? And they told me, well, the bank said, we're going to give this nonprofit money, and we decided we're going to make improvements to one of the playgrounds in the city of Reading. Now, mind you, I'm the mayor of the city of Reading. Nobody asked me if that should be the playground, number one. And nobody asked me what my thoughts were about it. But they already had orchestrated this, but I found out what our part of the bargain was, and that was that we were going to maintain the playground. Now, imagine this. One of the poorest cities, highest poverty rates in the United States, okay? In Act 47, structural deficit, you're going to come in and make an investment in our city for something that I didn't ask for, and then I'm going to be stuck holding the bill at the end of the day. Well, we decided this isn't working, and so my staff folks, Aaron Lloyd, Larry Murin, began to reach out to Michael and the Public Banking Initiative, and we began to look at what can we do here in the city of Reading? How can we cobble some financial resources together? And how can we reach into our immediate community, our local community, and create a sum of monies that can be used to invest into businesses that, small businesses in our community with loans. What can we do to help offset some economic development concepts? Or, in other words, we have to be able, cities today, cities like Reading and across the state, are looking at ways in which we can gather and use our resources to help circulate money within our city. And this is one of the challenges that we have, and many cities have. We have old industrial sites that we can't even control because we don't have money. So we have other economic development organizations who come in, control these sites, and these are county development organizations, come in, control the sites, but yet the businesses that come in really aren't benefiting the city of Reading. It's been more of a benefit for the people living outside of the city. And again, we've lost control of controlling our own destiny. So we reached out, we got a plan. We're looking at a municipal finance authority, that concept. We still have some things to vet, but there's tremendous potential there because we can get other organizations, our water authority, our parking authority, to put some of their assets into this. We've got pension monies from our 3 pension plans in the city of Reading. In other words, it's a way in which we can start cobbling monies that can be used to create our local economy within our city, but continually to circulate the money and helping businesses and also providing loans for incubators and what have you. Now, what are some of the things that we're doing now in Reading towards those initiatives? I mentioned before that in Edmonton, Canada, Gray's Paper, which has a way of making paper environmentally friendly paper. I went up to Canada, we signed an MOU, and they're willing to come and put a plant in the city of Reading, and we're in the process of getting control of the site where that can happen. Towing. We rely on a private company to do the towing here in the city of Reading, which has a tremendous impact that this city could make. And so we're beginning to look now at how we can take over towing for the city of Reading. We have been looking at for our nonprofits, some of the concepts that Terry McDonald out in Oregon has used with mattress recycling, automobile processing, where they either strip the cars or in some instances actually rebuild cars and get it into the hands of people who are financially stressed, even appliances. But there is how we can better use our water authority. Now, luckily we got under the Act 73 window, which the Act passed last June. We had just signed a lease agreement with our water authority 2 weeks before that. So because we have an existing agreement, we can still benefit from that. But right now we're looking to see how we can partner with the water authority, how they can help us. One of the things that they did is they were able to provide a loan to the city at no interest so that we could do the traffic lighting initiative here in our city, LED lighting, which basically is going to save the city of Reading possibly $70,000, $80,000. But it was an example of a partnership of using your authorities to help offset some of the things that the city no longer could do. Many cities relied on their CDBG funding, and Reading, we were one of them. But you know, last year we got cut 17% from HUD, and this year we're going to be cut another 5%. So we've had to learn to wean off of those monies. However, we have set up microloan programs with those monies that we've made available to help some of our local businesses. So we are trying to continue to do that. And of course, believe it or not, one of the biggest issues that we have is the fact that we're looking at a land value tax and the benefits of a land value tax as far as helping with economic development. And we found that many of the businesses stand to benefit. It's a tax neutral concept, stand to benefit with this, but you know, I still have members on council saying, well, you know, we need to talk about this. We've been talking about this since 2002. And it's a pretty easy concept to understand, but it's a matter of getting the willingness to do this. So we've taken the initiative to go out in small business roundtables and begin to talk about this with the companies. And once they see the savings, it's really proving to show its worth, because a number of the companies that we've been in front of who were thinking about expansion, but not necessarily in the city of Reading, have now reconsidered and are considering expanding in our city because of the benefits. But these are just some of the things that we've been forced to look at as a city that's been under financial distress status, and one of the many cities in Pennsylvania that's going to have to learn to recreate itself. And so these are the initiatives that we've taken. Thanks to the gentleman sitting up here and Neil and some of the other organizations. You got to get out, you got to think out of the box, because the old way in which cities operated is not sustainable anymore. Thank you.
Okay, so our last speaker is Mike Kraus. Mike is a friend of mine and a colleague from the Public Banking Institute. Mike is also a 1971 graduate of Franklin and Marshall and a founding director of our national organization, the Public Banking Institute, where our national organization is headquartered in Sonoma. And he's also chairman of the Pennsylvania Public Banking Project, which is the co-host for this event. Mike has considerable experience in Pennsylvania politics, and is also a international. So what happened? I don't know. But anyway, Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you. It's really fun to be back on this campus. I think I got a good education here. As I walk around the campus, the facilities, go through the course offerings, look at the faculty here, I think you're getting a better one, which is good because you don't need it, which is great. I will say, by the way, I'd rather anybody here had a better time than I had, but that's another story. And I have a fraternity brother in the room who actually knows the truth that we're not going to go there, rather than stay on top. Why do I say you're going to need a good education? Well, let's look at what happened in the 40 years or so since I graduated. There has been an enormous change in the United States. I'll go back first to unintended consequences. I worked for a company whose owner was a genius. And standing on the docks in Baltimore in the 50s, he looked at the cargo we brought out of a ship. And he saw the nets going down into the ship, the boxes being loaded up and taken out, put down. And he said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And he devised and manufactured the first ocean-going container. And it was a service of sea land that ran from the East Coast down to Sonoma and back. That's what changed America, you could argue, because that container made it possible not only to ship huge volumes of goods long distance at low unit cost, it made it possible to access cheap foreign labor. And that was the end of it. What began as a trickle became a flood, became a tidal wave of jobs offshore out of the United States in massive numbers, massive numbers. And it's not just the old dirty fingernail jobs, no. Architectural jobs, legal support jobs, accounting jobs, landscaping, they're all being, pick up your phone, try to get Apple, and you're talking to somebody in Bangladesh. That's just what it is. That's what it is. If that continues, there will be no, let's put it this way. The United States in the years after the war, the Second World War, by the way, was a kind of a miracle. It was the greatest and most broadly shared prosperity the world had ever seen. I mean broadly shared. People wanted to be a part of that. They really did. It was quite something. That's going away. You hear the term that we're being hollowed out. That doesn't get it. The middle class is being devoured, is what is happening. You're getting an apartheid America. That's what you're getting. We don't need all the causes, but the effect of these years of policy, of tax law, of free trade, and what have you, is a very small group of very, very wealthy people and everybody else, served by a little lower down rung tier retainers, people like presidents and congresses who do their bidding, that sort. That's what we got, and it's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting worse. Those trends are all just going that way. And one thing you know about established wealth, it's got a logic of its own. Self-preservation, it just happens. It doesn't matter you're a nice person with wealth. The major function of your wealth is to create more wealth. Well, I was a government major, so I'll do government 101. Political power in any society is a function of wealth. It flows from wealth. When wealth is concentrated, then so too is political power. Wealth is incredibly concentrated right now in the United States, therefore so too is political power. And there's not much will at the national level to change that. In fact, there's almost no will to change that at the national level. You bump up against what are called vested interests, meaning I got mine, I like it that way. I like it that way. And all the tax laws and the investment laws we're talking about facilitate that further concentration of wealth. So, I'd like you students especially to answer some question. What kind of country do you want to raise a family in? Should it be a just country? Should it be a fair country? Should we want expanding opportunity? I hope your answer is yes. But if it is yes, then the next question is, okay, what are you prepared to do about that? That's really what I most like to get out of the seat, is a sense that the young people here are prepared to do something about it. And I'll tell you why. I'm 63. The rule is, more of my life now starts to be behind me than back before me. That's in part, your parents already told you that. That's what happens. You will get older and you'll start running out of time, basically, right? I'm still in the fight, other folks are still in the fight, but you know, it takes young legs and young minds and young hearts to win the future. So what I really want to find out tonight is if you're in this, if you see it as your future, if you're prepared to embrace the responsibilities of citizens in a democracy. Because if you are not, your children aren't going to live in one. It's that close. This is not good. You know, it's really un-American, basically. Okay, what do we do about that? Given that it's quite likely that the federal establishment will do nothing, which is why it was a policy. You understand that. Doing nothing, stagnation, you know, the gridlock, all that stuff, that's a policy. It's called keeping things the way they are. That's a policy. So when they tell you your government's got no policy, no, that's ridiculous. Of course they do. It's keeping things the way they are. That's the policy in Washington. It's not going to change anytime soon. So how and where does it change? Well, it changes locally. One of the great things about America has always been the phenomenal diversity of the American people in its recent. It's a, you know, de Tocqueville saw it. You still see it. It's traveled around the country. It's incredible diversity. How do you tap into that? How do you harness it? Well, you do things like change investment strategies and make it possible for people to buy into the local economic development. You do, as the mayor has done, you take things on. You look for new models. But you can do more than that. It comes down to so much does to money. Where does the money come from? Well, it can be investment. It can be private equity. But this nation has all kinds of money swirled away in its local, state, and county governments. If you read the budget of the state of Pennsylvania, you think, oh my God, no, that's terrible. But if you read something called the Consolidated Annual Financial Reports, the CAFRs, you will find out that this state sits on any given year on $1 trillion, and it's swirled away in boards and commissions and agencies and authorities. It rolls over from year to year, and we act like it's not there. But of course it is there. You get another education reading the CAFRs. I think we'll back up a second. there's a lot of money out there available at the state, county, and municipal level in this country, and it can be harnessed. We believe in the public banking group that that's a major step that needs to be taken. We need to harness our public resources and put them in our own banks and do what bankers do, leverage those funds and make investments, except the returns come back to the people. The bank's profits come back to the people. Its investments are in the community, working through our local banks. We think that's a smart way to go. Now let me describe how this could actually happen. The county of Bucks, 630,000 people, sits on a rainy day fund, 40 million bucks. It makes 0.29% if it makes that, because its criteria are security, liquidity, return. They don't really care about return. That money's got to be available when they need it. That's got to be safe. So it's parked in some investment someplace. That's enough money to capitalize a bank in this Commonwealth, a bank of $40 million. You leverage that 10 to 1, and you're loaning out $400 million in a population of 630,000 people. That's a very big deal. There is a model for this kind of bank. It's called the Bank of North Dakota. It was formed 92 years ago. Just after the Fed came into being, these really smart farmers said, you know, we don't want any parts of that. So they made their own bank, and they formed their own bank, and it is a public bank. Over the years now, it holds all the assets of the state of North Dakota. So every microphone, every college university is in that bank's asset base. So they've taken their public assets as a capital base for a bank, and then the bank is run by state employees. They don't get any mega salaries or bonuses, they get a civil service salary. It's one office, and they partner with local banks to increase their lending activity. So for example, your local banks have a $5 million limit, and someone says, I want to build a new car dealership, I need $10 million. And he says, can't help you. And he says, oh, geez, too bad, I'm going to Bank of America or Wells Fargo. And the local bank loses the customer. And then the big bank comes in and starts cross-selling and sells the credit cards and everything else, and the local bank business goes down, not in North Dakota. North Dakota, the banks are very strong and very healthy. No failures, almost a very small loss-loan ratio, really well-run banks because they are supported by the public bank. You go to your local bank, they approve your credit, but you need more money they can lend, or they want to buy that you want a lower interest rate for 3 or 4 years. The state bank buys that down to give you a payment you deal with in terms of your cash flow, your business plan. These are things that public banks can do. We started out looking at state level public banks as a model in North Dakota, a really good one. And I gave testimony in a couple of state legislatures and I realized these bills weren't going to go anywhere because no one had built any foundation. So we stopped doing that. We're talking to cities and counties all across Pennsylvania, to chambers of commerce, to local bankers, to the people under legislators. And we'll get around to the state banks sooner or later, but it's really not all important. Any public banks anywhere, county level, city level, Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Reading, Lancaster, Bucks County, Montgomery County, Washington, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We just need to get this going and create some more public banks as an alternative to what? To an utterly failed banking system. The private banking system, the Wall Street dominant system, is a complete failure. Leave aside that they needed trillions to stay in business, a pretty good indication of failure. Leave that aside. They don't do the major thing banks are meant to do, which is direct capital and credit into the productive economy. They absolutely fail to do that over and over again. The $23 trillion, who knows what that was, that the Federal Reserve pumped into the Wall Street banks never got past Wall Street. It went right back into the reserve accounts at the Fed to prop up the balance sheets and make money on the interest. It never, ever, ever got loaned out. Maybe some of you young folks here were all of 5 years ago. You were 13 maybe, and not paying attention. Night after night, with the banks are melting down, we were harangued by desperate talking heads. If we don't bail these guys out, credit's going to collapse. You won't be able to get a loan. Small business will dry up. Unemployment will skyrocket. Yada yada. So we bailed them out, and all those things happened. They just kept the money. They didn't care about your job, your career, your college education, your home, your community. They just cared about the bottom line of their bank. That's what they get paid to do. This is not a surprise. So knowing that, you want to start thinking about other ways to do banking. There's nothing wrong with banking. It's the people running it that are the problem and how they're running it. So we're posing a new model. You're in Pennsylvania, it's a Commonwealth. Perfect. We want to put the Commonwealth to work for the common good. The first public bank in America was, of course, in Philadelphia. They had a public bank. They didn't have taxes. They loaned money into the community. That came back as interest, and that took the place of taxes in the city of Philadelphia up until Hamilton guys ran them out of town. But it was a viable, working concept. So we are recommending the creation of a network of public banks across the nation to harness the credit capacity inherent in the assets of the people. In the assets of the people. And here are the things you will look for in any public bank formation. Here. Someone's got to decide the mission. If you want to have a public bank in your state, city, or county, what do you want it to do? It's important. Then you get to capitalization. Once you've got the mission, you ask yourself, how fast do I want to get there? And you get some idea of how much capital you need. You begin to decide where to get that capital from. Then you get into governance. No offense to anybody, how to make sure the politicians don't run the bank. You want bankers to run these banks and management. Then you get to three things that are unheard of at Wall Street: accountability, transparency, and risk management. These are unknown concepts on Wall Street. Like a public bank, you want to make sure these concepts are known. So we're suggesting this evening that as a part of how we relocalize our economy, that apart from the equity portion of this deal, how we get investment, we, citizens collectively, whatever town, city, state you're in, are sitting on substantial public assets that can be used to capitalize the bank, and that can be distributed into the productive economy in cooperation with our local banks. This isn't a retail bank I'm talking about. It's got one office. It doesn't have tellers, it doesn't take deposits, except for your town. Your town puts money there. It doesn't do advertising, it doesn't do marketing, got no ATMs. It's a very low overhead deal. It works in partnership with the community banks that already exist. And in North Dakota, the community banks are taking market share back from the big boys. It's that successful. So, I started out, remember what a great time I had at Franklin College. I'm still there. Later on, I'm going to my office at Hildy's. I used to have an office there. And I'll be there shortly to see my seat's still warm. And I asked you, though, to consider what kind of nation, community you want to graduate into. Because the one you're going to graduate into is very different than what I graduated into. In those days, social mobility meant up. Doesn't mean that now. It's down. For the majority of Americans, they're moving down. Middle class is shrinking. The underclass call that is growing, and the top class gets ever richer and less productive. So I suggested that you all need to make some decisions about why you're here and what you do afterwards. And I want you to consider if you're prepared to embrace the responsibilities of citizens in a democracy. Because if you are not, neither you nor your children will live in one. Thank you.
To ask any questions you might have. So we have a mic here. Walt has the mic, and please.
I'm interested in knowing if any of you have already thought about the Transition Town, Transition Initiative, and the importance of the prices of oil going up and the carbon footprint relief, and do you have any suggestions on how we can get involved in that kind of thing, what we might do locally?
Well, actually, I'm happy to take that question, actually, because I am part of the Transition Town Media. Media is a town outside of Philadelphia, and we happen to have a transition town. A transition town is a worldwide movement that came out of England about 5 years ago, and communities throughout the world and throughout the United States are self-organizing to create the relationships to be self-sustaining. The whole idea being that we cannot count on Washington, and there is a Transition Town USA. If you Google that, you can go to the National Transition Town website, and there you'll find how to begin to organize a transition town. This is something that I've been involved with here in media now it's been going on for about 3 years, and I've been involved for about 9 months, and it's all self-organized, self-generated. We just started a community garden, and we had last Sunday we had a spring equinox celebration. So it's it's a lot of partying. It's a lot of fun. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I went to some thing at the Sustainable Agricultural Conference where a person from media came and made presentations.
That was Marie Goodman.
Right, and we're thinking about doing one in Elizabeth.
Well, we would strongly encourage that and support that effort. And any other questions for our panelists? Yes.
I have a question. Okay. I have a question for Mr. Piven, Mike Piven. You mentioned about local banking, and I was just wondering about what the last panelist said. How can you make sure that the local banking or the local bankers are not going to turn into the way Wall Street bankers turn into? I guess. Yes.
The question was a good one. For example, when you suggest I have a bank in Pennsylvania, and you want to give those guys a bank, like that. Good question. You have to structure in the firewalls. As for example, in North Dakota, there's a board of governors on their back. There's the governor, the attorney general, and the ag secretary, the big ag state. And they have limited role. They pick the CEO, he runs the bank. They nominate a 7-member banking board to whom the CEO reports, who watch how he runs the bank. But there are several other safeguards built in. One is they're paid a civil servant salary. The governors, they get no more salary. They already got a salary. The employees get paid appropriate civil servant salaries. No bonuses, no commissions, no incentive to take risk. It's not set up to incent gambling. Secondly, it's public, so it is publicly audited. And you see the state banking department, in fact, we audited that bank in Pennsylvania, as well as the Commonwealth's Auditor General. It will get audited twice. So first, you take the incentive out for gambling. There's no reward for doing a credit default swap, none whatsoever. It's straight up lending. Finally, they don't originate the loans. It's not a bank of last resort. You don't get turned down at Fulton Bank and go run the state bank. Rather, Fulton Bank's got to say, yes, this passes our credit test, but you want more money than we can go, it's above our limit, or you're going to buy down the interest rate. Now let's take it to the public bank, and then they do a risk analysis. So in terms of accountability, transparency, and risk analysis, this is a really safe way to bank. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Thanks. Hi, thanks all three of you for great presentations. I have a question for the mayor. You were very articulate in what you were facing and what you're trying to do, and there are other mayors in Pennsylvania and across the country who are facing the same situation. And you pointed out that it was getting people to make decisions to move forward. What can citizens of your city and small business people in your city do to make that decision-making quicker and better?
I think the most important thing is to be able to get in front of the people in the city and begin to articulate what your plans are. I know in Reading, one of the initiatives that I've taken on is getting into the neighborhoods. We've really been going out by way of the faith community, because I have quarterly faith community meetings. Also getting into the organized neighborhood groups, like some of our historic districts have regular organized groups. But getting that message out and making presentations to them, you know, we're probably going to be rolling out the land value tax, because I don't want to see what's happened in the past where the elected officials end up making a decision without the citizens having the knowledge of what the initiative would mean, where they can begin to lobby their council person. But I think that's very much important. And of course, you know, I still have a pretty good email list from when I ran, and we use that. We use that as a tool to get our message out to the people who supported me and voted for me, to also get into the hands of their friends and what have you. So yeah, you've got to be able to get out in front of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the three of you also, as this gentleman did. I think it was really interesting. And I have a question that echoes the question that the young lady there asked about, you know, how do you prevent the local guys from becoming like the big guys, except that I have that question for Michael Schuman. Before I get to asking that question, though, I do want to say, Mayor, that we have a center at Franklin and Marshall College. You promoted us to a university, but we're only a college, but that's all right.
Same mistake.
Yeah, yeah.
My school went from university to a college.
But we have something here, it's called the Local Economy Center, that does work on possibilities for local economic development. I think we would love to work with you. You're right up the street, not too far away from here. So, you know, there's research that can be done, you know, initiatives that can be explored. That would make our life a lot more meaningful. So we will be enriched by that. Now, the question that I have is about the question of local. I understand the drive for the local, and I agree with it. I think there is one piece missing, which is the question that the young lady there asked. If you create local businesses, how do you prevent them from going the way of big business? What are the safeguards in place? I mean, I've heard case after case after case of local business being started out with local support, and then it gets sold once it reaches, you know, a certain level of success, gets bought out by a larger company. The mayor was talking about local, you know, businesses providing jobs for local, and then when they become successful, that's when the vultures, you know, come in and snap it up, and then you have no local control anymore. In public banking, because it's a public institution, you can create the firewalls. But how do you create the firewalls against the vultures when you create local businesses if you do not have in place mechanisms that make sure that they are successful as a result of the support of the community, and then they have to remain loyal to the community? I haven't seen anything about local development, local economy stuff that addresses that question, and I would love to have that question addressed, because then I think it would be a really powerful transformative movement. But in the absence of those kind of firewalls that can be put into the forms of business organizations and local community support, it's kind of like a little bit like, yeah, we're working to create businesses, and then the success is going to be snuffed up by the vultures. And I would like to make sure that it doesn't go there.
Right, so I have three answers for you. The first answer is antitrust. We have laws that need to be enforced. They're not being well enforced now. Antitrust second is competitiveness. And I would argue that local businesses actually are becoming increasingly competitive and larger businesses less competitive. And what we're going to see is exactly, what we're going to see in the next few years is exactly what we saw in 2008, which are major companies on the verge of bankruptcy. And we have to have the courage to let big business fail. And if we let them fail and don't resort to heroic measures to bail them out, I think we will see the competitive advantages of smaller businesses more readily. The third thing I would say is that local investment actually is part of the answer you're looking for. Because you said it yourself, a smaller business is led by an entrepreneur who sooner or later wants to retire. And maybe the family member is not willing to take it on, so that person needs to cash out. How is the person going to cash out? Well, it's true that really the only resort that person has now is to sell out to a larger business. But by creating a whole marketplace for the capitalization of local businesses and the creation of local stock and the creation of local stock markets and local investment funds, we are creating a value for smaller scale selling of businesses to other local owners. So that possibility will be there, which isn't there right now. So there's no perfect antidote to prevent someone from selling out unless you require it from a top-down level. But this at least puts something in place that gives the entrepreneur another option to cash out and keep the company local.
Worker-owned businesses, for example, would do it. That's kind of an answer.
Sure.
You wouldn't have to rely on antitrust and this and that. That would be an answer. Worker-owned businesses, they're not going to sell their jobs away. Why can't it be local businesses, but worker-owned businesses?
No reason it can't be. It can be worker-owned, it can be public-private, it can be a local stock company, it can be a cooperative. So yeah, there are many models, but all of these models require capital to flow more easily, cheaply, with lower legal bills than they do today.
And a lot of the answer for that is one of the missions of public banking. If we had a network of public banks all around the United States, each of which was focusing on investment opportunities within that particular jurisdiction. So let's say there was a public bank here in Lancaster, and there was one in Montgomery County, et cetera. And they are leveraging those community assets for that area, and that's going to keep those that investment there locally. And the other thing that I'm noticing, and that is a change in the attitude of young people, where and it's more of an attitude of circulation rather than accumulation. It's the world is more about relationships than it is about climbing the ladder. So and hopefully that cultural change will continue. I think you had a question?
Actually, I have a comment and a question. The comment is that from a corporate law standpoint, many states are now authorizing new types of social corporations that you can build those types of transparencies and restrictions into. I work with Trex to try to work on some of those things here in Pennsylvania. So there are some legal strategies to accomplish that. My question is, with the North Dakota Bank, and I represent a lot of community banks, so I see what type of questions they get from the FDIC about their local lending. And I'm curious as to whether the North Dakota Bank, and I know a little bit about it, whether it's FDIC insured so that it has a federal regulator that's coming in, and how do they take a look at the underwriting process of the commercial loans that the North Dakota Bank participates? And whether that is considered to be an impediment Two.
They are not FDIC insured because the state's got millions of dollars in the bank and FDIC covers $250,000. So they're self-insured in effect. And they're better regulated because the state regulates them. I mean, you know, look at the banks on Wall Street, the Fed regulates them. Doing a great job. Some guy in London blows, $9 billion, and no one knows about it, they're all covered up anyway, and maybe takes the bank out. Next time he goes down, he takes the bank with him, and are you covered? You all think you've got FDIC insurance. That's an IU for organization owned by the banks. FDIC is funded by the banks. So they're taking money out of accounts in Cyprus. Is your money safe in their banks in the US? Possibly. Possibly not. Possibly, if the bank goes down, it takes not just your 250, but it takes a city's 40 million. That city's going to be in bankruptcy court for a decade to get 10 cents on the dollar. Now, those are the federally insured banks, so I don't really have a lot of faith in those banks. So one, it's not federally insured, and two, in terms of how they make credit decisions. Like any bank, they have a credit and a risk management committee. It's quite a structured bank. So first you go to your local bank, and you persuade them you're a good credit risk. That's one. Then you go to the public bank, and they must say, for their participation, you're a good credit risk. And there is a very low default ratio among the loans in North Dakota for that reason. There's a double credit vetting process. And by the way, no one gets a bonus or a commission for writing the loan. There's no incentive to take a short term, give you a liar's loan, you know, and take a short term and get it. That doesn't exist. They pay a civil servant's salary, appropriate, of course, with the level of education, but they take the incentive for risk and gambling out of the credit decision process. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so I guess that really the answer is that they're chartered by the state of North Dakota, which means the North Dakota Banking Department has regulatory authority
Yes.
over them, but since they don't take any public deposits, they're not required, as you are in many states, to get FDIC insurance. So there is a regulator, or it's a state regulator, and then you have the transparency items that you just talked about.
Yes. They must have their own independent audit, and then the banking commission in the state audits them also. They get a double audit.
So we have time for 2 more questions. Back here.
Time for more than that.
Oh, we're going to Hilda.
I'm spending the night one day home. It's not-
We're going to Hilda.
I'm good. I'm
There you go.
good.
Is the public bank involved with,
Could speak it, get closer to me.
is the public bank involved at all with the housing market, or do they leave that?
Yes.
How does that work? Or?
The public bank, if the local bank wants to give a mortgage, the public bank can participate in that. But more to the point, the public bank is a secondary market. You were talking about intrastate capacity to develop credit. Well, the BND is an intrastate secondary market for mortgages. So your local bank can sell its mortgages to the BND. That gives them more capital to put back into their loan portfolio. The bank can also participate in the bond market. You can go in the market for, you're going to build a stadium or whatever in your city. You want to let bonds. Well, the public bank can bid those bonds down. They'll say, we'll take it for 5% and not 6%. Ooh. Or if they buy the bonds, the interest paid goes back into your bank because you own it. It comes back into your own general fund. So if you consider that interest is at least 40% of any public project, the Bay Bridge in California, what have you, 40% of that is interest cost. If you can push that debt service down, there is substantial potential savings for municipalities. So public bank can function that way too. But yes, they play in the mortgage market. The BND's got the state of population is 670,000. That's Pittsburgh, roughly. They got a $2.9 billion loan portfolio circulating in that state of 670,000 people. And each year for the last 10, they've returned $30 million of their profits on a 50-50 split, 50 in the bank, 50 in the public, into the general fund, revenue without taxation. Would you got some revenue without taxation, Mr. Mayor? Well, there you go. So it has those effects. Now mind you, it's 92 years old. You don't get out the gate doing all that stuff. It goes over time.
A quick comment and a question for you, Mike. For those students here tonight, I have done since 2007 an enormous amount of reading and studying about the problems that we have gone through. And I've heard thousands upon thousands of different answers and solutions for fixing it. The problem that is common with all of those is that none of these solutions offer any way of implementation, of getting them done. What you're hearing here tonight is an effective way of implementing solutions at the local level. And it's really important that you understand that. Then Mike, the question for you is, when I've talked to people about the idea of publicly owned banks, the question hasn't been, are they going to be like Wall Street banks? The question is, are they going to be as corrupt as the people running city council? And how do you prevent that?
And it comes up over and over again, and I have addressed it, but I'll address it again. When you look at setting up a bank of this nature, here are your correct things you gotta look at. Mission, that's number one. What do you want it to do? Number two, capitalization. How you gonna fund the bank? Then three, governance. Then four, management. Those are two different things than accountability, transparency, risk management. The model we suggest is that elected officials must ultimately take responsibility, or you have no accountability. To whom is the Federal Reserve accountable? Nobody. Nobody. This was, by the way, must be some gov majors here, this was the height of progressive government, Woodrow Wilson. We're going to take those nasty politicians out of it and let the bankers run the banks. That worked out well, didn't it? I mean, you know, you can't have it both ways, people. If you want to live in a democracy and you want some accountability, then you've got to make elected officials accountable. If you don't, want to give the experts to run the show, then you have no effective control. You surrender that, like the Federal Reserve. Gone. So, you know, it's unfortunate, but it's not a perfect world. So we think that people who are elected, who are accountable to voters, who can be removed, need to be ultimately accountable. But the role is limited. In our case, we're saying the role is to hire the CEO, then he does the hiring and firing, or his staff. This is not a patronage machine, where, you know, cousins and uncles and brothers get jobs, not that. And secondly, they have a role year to year in adjusting the mission of the bank. Within the parameters, North Dakota, they say, the legislature says, this year we want a 70-30 split, or this year we want a rural housing program, or this year we want a biotech investment program, or this year, or this year. That board, responsible to the citizens, makes that call. So we limit the role of the governors and separate it from management. The managers are pros, the bankers. They're guided by a banking board, which the government selects, of course. Of course they do. But then they drop out. So you limit the role of governance from the management of the bank on a day-to-day basis. It's really not all that complicated. That's the point to make, by the way. This is new in Pennsylvania because I haven't thought of it since Ben Franklin's time. But this model is working in North Dakota. So we're not talking about reinventing the wheel. We're just going to roll it down to Pennsylvania, North Dakota, basically, and modify it as needs be. This is not complicated.
Another question here.
If we've got the model already, can't we go find somebody with a big bankroll to kick in $40 million and start the model?
Well, that's us. Our cities, states, towns have that money. It's our money already. It's in different places. It's in sinking funds. It's in rainy day funds. It's in pension funds. Someone mentioned pension funds. There's nothing to stop unions from taking a position in the bank. But Pennsylvania, I mentioned the budget and the CAFRs, the consolidated annual pension reports. But you read the CAFRs, and it talks about this state's two employee pension funds. And you read the footnotes down on page 180. It's wonderful. And it talks about how they defend against the risk of doing business in 30 foreign currencies. Now take that one in. Your paycheck, the deduction, is not only not being invested in Pennsylvania, it's not being invested in the United States. Think about that. Meanwhile, your pension fund is getting 4%, at least 8%. The Bank of North Dakota returns 17 to 25% on equity year in and year out. It's a great place to invest union funds. And there's a union guy right there. And unions, the decline of the middle class is concurrent with the decline of unions. If you don't get the connection, you're not paying attention. Really. Unions are vital in good jobs and health care and benefits. They don't have a lot of friends right now, but they got money. can acquire friends with money, you know. And so if unions start to place some of their abundant capital, 20%, in facilitating local public bank creation in other communities, and then they get their piece out, it's a great way for unions to make some new friends with their money.
If I could just add one other thing, why is it not happening? There are opponents, and the opponents are the big banks. And they, you know, there was a strong movement, for example, in Massachusetts to do a public bank, and the Boston Federal Reserve commissioned a study on public banking, and who is on the board of the Federal Reserve in Boston? All the big banks. And guess what the study said? Oh, well, it'll really dilute the competitive atmosphere of banking if we have public involved in all this. So just prepare for blowback in all of this. I mean, you know, there was a time when public banking was, you know, oh, it's just North Dakota, below the radar screen, but now there are movements all across the country. And so it's going to be a big fight, and it's worth winning.
Talking about pension funds, and you know, something that comes up is the ERISA rule and the prudent man rule. If you're trying to go to a local municipality, township, county, state, how do you get, you know, what argument can you use there?
Well, a lot to be said about that. First of all, if 2.6% is the rate of return that Wall Street is getting every year, I don't know what prudence means if that's your only alternative. So some of this just requires education of pension fund managers. But I also tend to believe that you know, they are going to be the last people we turn around. And in a way, the way that I see the local investment universe developing is that first we have to make it cheaper and easier to issue securities, which we're on the verge of doing. Then we have to create, as Trex was trying to do, local stock markets. That creates liquidity. Once you have liquid markets, we can create funds. Now, those funds may not all be in the shape of of mutual funds. But once you have mutual funds with local securities and a track record, then we can have that conversation with the pension fund manager. I really think you have to kind of go through this order, because you can't have a stock market without securities. We don't have the securities yet. You can't have an investment fund of local securities until you have liquidity. So that's when we need the stock market. And I think we're not really going to be able to turn around the pension fund managers until we have a critical mass of performance to point to.
Yeah. So, more quick right here.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about why the shift to localities would be really good for Americans, but how does the U.S. sort of go about this as a unilaterally? Because we are, you know, so interconnected to the international community. Switching over to local stock exchanges and local businesses doesn't mean that big corporations aren't going to exist in the rest of the world.
All right. Go ahead. I just grabbed whatever mic is there. Not sure where. This one's going to China. So a lot to be said. So the reason I was in Australia is that it was the second annual conference of localization organizers around the world. So there is an emerging critical mass of people with the slogan, think globally, act locally, and who believe that local self-reliance is the key to global prosperity. And part of the purpose of building this international network is to share public policy innovations like local stock markets, to share business innovations that enable local businesses to be more competitive, that share grassroots movements and broad education. And I think that's what's going to make the difference. Nothing is going to eliminate global companies. But if we simply get rid of all of the laws that really are unnaturally making global companies more competitive. I mean, I pointed out just one of them, which is the fact that our securities laws have meant that all of our long-term savings is capitalizing global business. That's a subset. Got to get rid of that. You get rid of it, then we're going to see a real deflation of global businesses. And these kinds of securities laws exist all over the world. So, you know, before and after this conference in Australia, I was talking, you know, with groups like this up and down the coast of the country, trying to tell them about changes we made in our securities laws to give them some blueprint for how they can change their securities laws. And I think this unnatural overfinance of global business that has happened worldwide is about to be unplugged.
I'll make another comment too. Public banking is new here, but in the rest of the world, it has roughly 40% of the market. China, Japan, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Brazil. This is not a new concept. And these are the economies that didn't melt down when Western Europe and the US did, because they weren't tied into all private banking industry. So the public bank was counter-cyclical. In North Dakota, they said, quote unquote, when the crash hit, they just kept the credit flowing. In 14 other states, 49, it just dried up. It kept flowing in North Dakota. That was the key. They kept the credit flowing. So in the BRIC nations, which are doing rather well, we're looking at a revised downward estimate, a revised downward estimate for U.S. growth. It's almost not growth. That's not what's happening outside Western Europe and the U.S. That's not what's happening in China, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. That's not what's happening there. They're doing rather well. Not perfectly, of course. They suffer too because they're not buying as much stuff anymore. But on the main, they've weathered this crisis far better than we have because they had a counter-cyclical credit agency active in the economy, keeping the credit flowing into the productive economy.
We have another question. Just two very brief comments. Thank you. I want to underscore the point that Mike Schuman made, that we have big interests that don't want what we want to happen. Community-owned broadband is the most efficient, most cost-effective, most easily to change technologically. 19 or 20 states have outlawed it because of lobbying by you-know-who. My second comment is your comment, sir, about how can we trust government, local government to do things right. Well, I'll tell you this anecdote. I live in Washington, D.C. and have for many years. And when I was young and naive, I looked at the solid waste system and saw that if the city controlled the transfer stations, not only would the city save a fortune, but businesses would save a fortune because the cost of handling this stuff went down. So I made a recommendation. It was in the 1990s. Not that old. 1990s.
Oh, you're not.
And people laughed at me. Neil, you trust the local government to do that? Well, it's now, it was 20 years later, and that's exactly what Mayor Williams did to get the year. And the city, it's been terrific, and this is relevant, because Mayor Vaughn Spencer is looking at the garbage system in the same way that we would like him, and all of us would like to see local control over those very valuable resources. Thank you.
How does microfinancing fit into your model? The question is microfinancing, which is...
Bank perspective, take a city like small city Pennsylvania. We tend to think of small businesses statistically. That means 500 employees. That's not a small business. New Jersey has 6,000 corporations. 23,000 are 3 employees or less. That's where there is tremendous potential for growth and development. And what a public bank could do is work with, again, the community banks to identify those small businesses that can benefit from credit. Michael's talking about the equity side of this. They can certainly benefit from investment, but they can also benefit from a credit injection. The two can go hand in hand. You'll have to come with a good business plan. Now what's happening is, since I've read, there are incubator plans that prepare people to run a small business, help them understand that kind of job. The missing component is, where's the money going to come from? I was meeting in Philadelphia the other day, and they went through program to program, where they can get you the technical support, and the bureaucratic support, and the facility acquisition, and then the money, the money to start your business up. Where's that going to come from? So it's possible that a public bank working through community banks can have a major impact if that's the mission you choose. And again, we come back to the beginning, we go out around advising a public bank, I don't tell people what it's for. Mission is defined locally. I don't care whatever that's your call. It's your cell, your city, your town, whatever. You pick the mission, but it must be addressed. And once you've got your mission in place, you go from there. Once you know what it is you want to accomplish, then you go forward. It could easily be micro and small business financing, or it might not be. It depends on what your municipality or government wants to do.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and any other burning questions? Well, I'd like to, thank Mayor Spencer and my friend Mike Kraus and Michael Schuman for a wonderful program, and let's give them host, Sean Flaherty and F&M University. We have some information about public banking outside if you're interested.